Bob Jolly. I'm the director of the Athenaeum. Welcome. This is the biggest crowd we've had here of adult people in almost 3 years, so welcome. We've had a lot of kids. Just a couple of housekeeping things, and then in a moment I'll turn the podium over to Sue Racanelli, President of the Board of Directors of the League of Women Voters of Vermont. She'll get us started on the program. The bathrooms are in the basement. If you've never been here, take the elevator. It's through that archway. There aren't any stairs and there aren't any up here. This is a good time to turn off your phones.
Good call.
And I want to turn off my own here. I'll figure this out later. And I want to thank KATV, who is here broadcasting. They are back here. And Channel 7 News from NVU is here as well. And so this is bringing this forum out to the public, so we're very glad to do that and thankful to them. And here is Sue Racanelli.
Hi, and welcome to the 2022 Lieutenant Governor Candidates Forum, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Vermont and our partners, St. Johnsbury Athenaeum, Vermont Commission on Women, and Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Burlington Chapter. My name is Sue Racanelli, President of the League of Women Voters. Our mission at the League is to empower voters and defend democracy. The League is a nonpartisan organization, and we neither endorse nor oppose political parties or candidates running for office. Our purpose in hosting candidate forums is for you, the voter, to meet your candidates, to hear what they have to say on the issues, and to ask questions. 3 candidates are running for the office of Lieutenant Governor. 2 of them, Senator Joe Benning, Republican, and David Zuckerman, Progressive Democrat, are here today. Ian Diamondstone of the Green Mountain Peace and Justice Party was invited. The Lieutenant Governor is the second-ranking officer of the executive branch with 3 primary responsibilities: presiding over the Senate and casting tie-breaking votes, determining committee assignments, and acting as governor when the governor is out of state, incapacitated, or in the case of a vacancy, acceding to the governorship. Now I'd like to call on Tom McCona, moderator. Tom is a former English teacher, principal, and library administrator. He lives in Montpelier and writes commentaries and feature articles for several publications. Tom will introduce you to the candidates and get us started. We're so pleased that you have joined us here this evening. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Sue and Bob. It is a pleasure to be here at the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum. This is such a beautiful building in such a wonderful town. And here in the same building, we have an art gallery and library all in one. As Sue mentioned, I'm a former principal and teacher, but for some reason, the issue of that I was a former executive director of the library is what ends up on this today. Maybe because we're in a beautiful library, but it's great to be here. So this is a forum. It's not a debate, so we'll be asking the candidates questions, and the candidates will not be asking each other questions. The questions come from the League of Women Voters and other sponsors. Those are the questions we start with. And then we will have questions. We got a couple of questions in advance by email, and we'll be taking questions from the audience. So we have the cards that were passed out at the table as you came in, and some people took cards and some people already left us questions. So that's great, and we have a couple of runners who will pass out blank cards for anybody who would like them, and also they will collect cards that have been completed. Of course, one of the hard things in life is talking and timing yourself at the same time, because it's hard to know how long you've been talking. So to help our candidates, neither one is short-winded and neither one has much talking experience. That's not what
That's unfair, because I'm a lawyer. I get paid by the word. So,
so to help them, they're allowed 2 minutes per answer on the questions, and 2 minutes for the opening statement and the closing statement. And in the front row, we have a volunteer from League of Women Voters who has cards, who will let them know when they have a minute left, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and when it's time to stop. So, actually, I didn't tell the second candidate this, but Senator Benning drew one of the two cards to see whether he was going first or second.
It's a fraudulent election. There you
So he'll be going first in a moment when we get to the opening statements. And then Mr. Zuckerman will be going first for the closing statements. So you probably all know who the two people are here, but on your left we have Senator Joe Benning from Caledonia County running on the Republican ticket. He's on your left, and on your right is David Zuckerman running as a progressive Democrat, both for Lieutenant Governor. I got that correct, right? Joe on the left, David on the right? Okay. They did. We were speaking ahead of time, and they did ask me to just call them Joe and David. So we'll go with that. They've been meeting and having in quite a few forums and doing a lot of talking. So let's get on with this. And
Might I ask one quick question?
yes,
Okay, I now see a number on it. I didn't know it was just color-based, but now that we see that they've got numbers on them, that's
They do.
great. Okay. Thank you.
okay. Yes.
You have my
And that's
permission to
jumping the
throw that
gun
at him if he
because
goes
you do have 2 minutes, even though it says one. Yes, thank you. So, Joe, would you like to start with your opening statement?
I would very much like to thank you all for coming out here tonight. I want to use this as my first public opportunity to thank profusely the citizens of the Caledonia Senatorial District. I have had the honor and the pleasure of representing you in the State House for the past 12 years. My term is officially coming to an end in January. It has been a highlight of my life. I say a highlight because I like to continue with highlights. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Joe Benning. I live in the town of Linden. I'm married to my wife, Deb. I like domestic tranquility, so I won't point out who she is in the audience tonight. You guys can figure that out. We have 2 children. Emily is our oldest. She is a paramedic in Stowe. Our son Justin is building machine parts down in the town of Norwich. I have been a state senator for 12 years, representing the district as a Republican. I like to think of myself as a moderate Republican. I have had the honor of also serving as the chair of Vermont's Human Rights Commission, and I've done several civic things in my lifetime. I am here tonight because I'm running for an office that I really cherish. I cherish the building. I cherish the body that works within that building, in which I would be a moderator. I've served as the town moderator in the town of Linden for 10 years, and I know all the players, and I know how they fit together. I also bring to the table something that unfortunately David can't, and this is not to disparage him, it's just a difference between us. I have a very good working relationship with Phil Scott, and I intend to use that to my advantage as a lieutenant governor. Thank you all again for coming out, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. David.
Well, thank you, Bob, I think over there, and Sue and Tom. Thank you for hosting, as well as the conservation voters, I didn't realize it, all the different co-sponsors, the Vermont Commission on Women and WILP for hosting this debate or forum. My name is David Zuckerman. I'm your former lieutenant governor. I also was a state legislator for 18 years. I'm also a father, a farmer, a small business owner, and I've really had that honor of serving for you for 22 years and hope to continue to do so. I'm not running solely because of my love of the building, but really because the vast majority of Vermonters are struggling financially. We have a climate crisis. We have a housing crisis. Many folks have been left behind as Vermont has become a playground for the rich. We've seen housing prices climbing with many folks moving in, which is a good thing, except it's making so that Vermonters can't afford to be here and live here. Folks are having a hard time putting food on their table. So when folks asked me to run, those were the issues they brought up. And I've been frustrated as a political figure for many years. I've worked to push bold ideas, and sometimes they've passed, but a lot of times politicians have nibbled around the edges, and we haven't really seen the progress on these major issues that we need to see. I will say that, of course, I'll be ready to work on day one, having been the Lieutenant Governor. I know the rules of the Senate. I know the players in the Senate. I've received the endorsement of the majority of the returning members of the Senate. And as I have in the past, I will run the Senate in a fair and even-handed way, but I will also use the office to bring more people into the process, to go to every corner of the state, helping folks really engage in the process with their legislators, representatives, and senators to help broaden those issues and that discussion to really impact people's everyday lives. Those struggles that folks are feeling every day are the critical issues of the day, and I look forward to working on those as your Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the first question is from the League of Women Voters, and this is the only question that the candidates received in advance. The other questions they will have not seen yet. So this first question, and David will be the first to answer it, and then we'll go to Joe. Describe your leadership style. How do you see yourself working with those who have differing views?
Well, a few things. As a legislator for 18 years and a member of the Progressive and then Progressive and Democratic Party, I've often been in the very minority viewpoint from a party perspective. On the other hand, what I did as a legislator, and in fact was named a chair of a committee by the Democratic Speaker of Agriculture back in the early 2000s, was because I was someone who could collaborate and work with people, whether we had agreement on issues or disagreement on issues. The first key is making sure everybody is comfortable voicing their positions on the issues at the table, that they're prepared and willing to bring forth ideas and witnesses and make sure they're all welcome in the process. And so as a chair of a committee, that's what I did, and we led to many successful pieces of legislation helping small farmers and different aspects of our agricultural community. But also working with allies both in and outside the building, as well as folks who are opposed, to find ways forward with legislation that that makes progress, but then also isn't offensive and make people feel like they will shut out. One of the pieces of legislation I'm very proud of is a piece you may or may not have heard about around Lyme disease. I worked closely with Lynn Dickinson, a representative from St. Albans, where we didn't agree on a lot of issues, but Lyme disease affects electric line workers, loggers, folks that work in agriculture, or recreational folks, all across the state. Almost everyone you know has someone you know has been bit by a tick, been impacted by Lyme disease or other tick-borne illness. And we worked hard together to come up with a bill to make sure doctors who practiced a wider range of scientifically supported, evidence-based methodologies to help folks with Lyme disease would not be sanctioned by the medical society. When you work with people and develop relationships with differences, you find those places of commonality and you get things done.
Thank you. Joe?
So my very first bill in the legislature was a bill to create an expungement process. Many of you may not have recognized this, but prior to 2011, when I first got there, if you had a low-level criminal offense on your criminal record, that was something that stuck with you all your life. I looked at that and thought that's not the way life should be. If you're somebody who got picked up as a teenager, for instance, at the age of 17 on a small possession of marijuana charge, and now you're a grandparent prevented from escorting your grandchild on a class trip somewhere, that to me was just not the way Vermont should be. So I marched myself up to the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, a guy named Dick Sears, who was a Democrat from down in Bennington, and the two of us put together a bill to create an expungement process. And as of last week, I am very proud to say, 43,109 people have gone through the expungement process in this state and have cleared their minor criminal records. That may not be a big deal to somebody who has never been in that position, but it demonstrates right from day one, I started working on things with people across the aisle, including the gentleman to my left, on various pieces of legislation. And it has been a hallmark, as far as I'm concerned, of my legislative career. I've been entrusted with the position of chair of the Senate Institutions Committee by the Democratic majority. I was placed on the rules committees by the Democratic majority. I was tasked with writing the rules that enabled all of you to get into the legislature over the past 2 years via Zoom by the Democratic majority. And I worked on that particular project with Becca Ballant, who was then the majority leader. I think that's my leadership style. I bring to the table the ability to walk across the aisle and sit down with people who have the same desires and try to make Vermont a better place.
Thank you. So the next question is to go to Joe first. Please summarize and prioritize the duties of the Lieutenant Governor.
The first thing that everybody should understand is that the Lieutenant Governor does not have it within his or her power to draft legislation. They cannot create a bill. They cannot go into a committee to defend and argue a bill or vote on it. They cannot debate it or vote on it on the Senate floor, with one exception. That is, if the Senate itself comes to a tie, the Lieutenant Governor would be the tie-breaking vote. Beyond that, I intend to use the position as a chief promoter of all things Vermont. I love Vermont. I love her people. I love their work ethic. I love their work product. I love these green hills and silver waters. And as we're coming out of COVID-19 and the influx of federal money we've enjoyed over the past 2 years is about to evaporate, somebody has to be out there selling Vermont on a global scale. And I would love to take that role on. We have to promote ourselves. We have to promote the people who are coming here and providing good jobs. And I'll use the example of last Saturday at the Caledonia County Airport, where I got to welcome Kyle Clark and his family. He is the CEO of an outfit called Beta Technologies. They are building electric airplanes in Burlington. They are thinking about expanding, and I'm very happy to say, as a result of our conversations, the beginnings of a more formal set of conversations are taking place where the Caledonia Airport may benefit from their being in the state of Vermont. I'm very excited about that. That's exactly the way I would want to use this job, not just to be the person moderating in the state Senate, but to literally be on the road encouraging people from all around the globe that Vermont is a great place to live, work, and play, and that's how I would want to use the position.
Thank you. David?
Well, sure. First, I'll give the precise answer with respect to the duties and roles of Lieutenant Governor, which I think was the question, not what it can't do, but what it's supposed to do, which is, 1, preside over the Senate, 2, be a member of the Committee on Committees, and actually I was in that position when we appointed you, institutions, so
you made a wise choice.
You worked with progressives and Democrats on that. And 3, of course, as was mentioned earlier by Sue, is to be the person who would ascend to be the governor, or the governor to become incapacitated or unable to fulfill their duties. So those are the 3 official tasks of the Lieutenant Governor. Beyond that, as my colleague indicated, you have a lot of opportunity to do work for Vermonters. I have a track record, a decades-long track record, of working with Vermonters, not only to promote the state and who we are and what we can do, but to effect policy change that improves people's lives. Whether it was marriage equality, cannabis reform, raise the minimum wage, changing our agriculture policies so that you now see a much more vibrant, diversified agriculture sector, so that we have more resiliency when it comes to a pandemic or otherwise, with local food being produced. These are the product of working in collaboration with Vermonters all over the state. Lieutenant Governor is a perfect position for someone who has that experience and those connections in every corner of the state in terms of bringing people into the process, as well as the many assignments that the Committee on Committees makes when tasked by the legislature to assign folks from the Senate in general. The Senate often gets to appoint to the Human Rights Commission, the Commission on Women. There are dozens of these commissions, and all those appointments come through the Committee on Committees on which the Lieutenant Governor serves. And so the impact on the policy and the discussion can be quite robust, but it's important to know people in every corner of the state, and I've been doing that work in every corner, bringing people in for over 20 years. And I look forward to continuing that. And it was those folks around the state that called me, as I said in my opening, asking me to run because of that collaborative process that I bring to the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question, which will go to Joe first, is from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. The Lieutenant Governor has a voice on issues. How would you use that voice in the state?
One of the best things that I remember from my college days was the opportunity to meet various diplomats from around the world who would come to the Northeast Kingdom through the legislative process, but end up at what was then known as Lyndon State College. That has continued on through my life at Vermont Law School, where I had the opportunity to not only be introduced to players from around the world, but also to be part of the process of selling Vermont in various quarters of the United States as someone representing the law school. In the Senate, I have had the wonderful experience of getting up close and personal with many individuals who have come from around the world to give them a tour of Vermont as well as the State House. It just happens to be I love history and I love broadcasting what we're all about. And given that opportunity as a lieutenant governor, I think is the perfect thing for me to work towards the end of my life, quite frankly. I enjoy that experience. I think it is a wonderful opportunity to be the first door as you walk in to the west side of the State House, which is where most people come in. And I've made a promise that if I'm in that office, that door will always be open for anybody who's walking in. And I love the opportunity to meet with people, talk with people, have everything about Vermont leaving that day in their brain so that they think, I met a really nice person, and this is a really nice place.
Thank you. David?
Well, thank you. The voice on the issues I've partly already addressed in my earlier remarks with respect to, it's not that the Lieutenant Governor needs to be the voice for people in the process. It's to amplify the voices that are out there wishing to be part of the process, wishing to see the policymakers address the climate crisis that we have sorely underperformed in looking to address the housing crisis, which is horrible now, but it was a building problem long before the pandemic. You know, these have been ongoing issues for a long time, and they've become exacerbated by the pandemic. But being basically an ambassador from the State House across the state of Vermont to bring more people in is a critical piece, and it's what I did for 4 years. A former lieutenant governor made a promise of the door always being open. Last couple of years, even when the door could be open, it wasn't always. I have a track record of having that door open, having Friday morning coffee hours, putting a newsletter out across the state, which any of you would be welcome to sign up for if I become lieutenant governor, getting more information out to the general public about the issues that are happening beyond what you read in the media and how to use your voice. First time I did it was about a week or two into being lieutenant governor in 2017, and within the day of my sending it out, 3 different senators came to the office and said, "Hey, I hear you're telling people about how to reach us about the issues." And I couldn't tell if they were really happy about that or not happy about that. But it said to me, that's effective. If people are contacting their legislators and their legislators are hearing it, that's going to impact policy. So that's how I would elevate my voice and actually the public of Vermont's voice on the issues in the State House.
Thank you. And we will switch order this time. I realized last time I didn't.
I'll go second every time, that's fine.
So this time we'll start with David. How do you see yourself stepping into the role of governor should the need arise?
Well, we've fortunately not had that for quite some time. We did have Howard Dean step into that role when Dick Snelling passed away. Again, 2 folks from different parties in those 2 roles. As Vermont was designed, voters vote for each of these positions individually, not as a pair. And I would certainly discuss with folks like Howard Dean, how did that transition go, which I already have done in times. And I would work with the serving secretaries of the different agencies. And I know them all, many of them quite well, because they've either been in the legislature or been in those roles for a long time, and would keep many of them on at first for a while to make sure the transition is smooth for Vermonters. The first thing you have to do is make sure we continue to keep government working as relatively well as it is to make sure folks' lives are not disrupted because something happened at the top. Then over time, you look at the policy differences or agreements and you choose to keep some and replace others. as Phil Scott did with some of Peter Shumlin's secretaries. And that is a process that happens. But again, the first and most important thing is to make sure the processes continue to go smoothly and the policies of government are applied and the laws of Vermont are applied to Vermonters in the manner that they are supposed to be.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
So the largest difference between David and I in this election is the relationship that each one of us has had with Phil Scott. I have no misgivings. I believe Phil Scott's going to be reelected, and I like Brenda Siegel, but I still believe Phil Scott's going to be reelected. David has had, I think even he would admit, a somewhat rocky relationship with Phil Scott. When Phil Scott was lieutenant governor, he was invited into the cabinet of Peter Shumlin. They cooperated and worked with each other all through Peter Shumlin's career as governor. When Phil Scott took the governor's chair, David was not invited into Phil Scott's cabinet. And I'm not going to cast aspersions on either one of them. It's just that the two of them did not get along to the point where David would be welcomed into that body. The second problem is that David, in the last primary, a few months ago now, was it 100 years ago now? On primary night, announced to his supporters that he was going back to Montpelier to get rid of that hump that was in the way. That hump was Phil Scott. I don't have that kind of relationship with Phil Scott. I have campaigned with his campaign team. I have worked on a daily basis with his administrative team. Most of his players have come through my committee looking for money from the capital bill, and we have worked long and hard on various issues. And one example I will give, not 3 miles from here, maybe even 2, is the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. Phil Scott had the vision that it ought to be completed, 93 miles of a linear park, if you will, for recreational purposes. He had to get money for that project. That money came through my capital bill, and I fought against people who were trying to get that money to be spent elsewhere. But if you travel that road today, you will see on the rail trail itself numerous infrastructure problems currently being finished to complete that trail.
Okay, thank you, Joe. David asked if he could have a respond to that, so we'll make an exception and give you up to a minute, and then
Sure.
Joe, you can speak again if you'd like to.
I appreciate that. I certainly never talked about getting rid of the governor. I just want to clarify remarks. I have deep respect for Governor Scott, and getting rid of is in my mind, part of the kind of language that would fit within other states' kind of language, and is not the kind of language I would use. I want to point out, as far as casting aspersions and how or what these things happened, it was actually before the governor took the office. It was within about a month of when we were both elected in 2017 that he did call me in and said, I was a part of Peter Shumlin's cabinet. It was useless to be a part of the cabinet. I stopped going to those meetings, and there's no point in your being a part of my cabinet because it didn't seem to do any good. That to me was very unfortunate. I went to him and said, we have a real opportunity in this divided government of Trump and Democrats to say, look, in Vermont, we have a Republican governor and a progressive Democrat lieutenant governor. We have areas we could agree on, as we discussed earlier, and there's a real opportunity here. He chose not to do that. So let the facts explain the situation, and you can interpret them how you wish. But I will, again, when I become lieutenant governor, extend my hand, be prepared to work with the governor on any number of issues, and I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
So, David, I happen to have the exact quote, at least as it was quoted in 7 days. You said, let's remember what this is all about. Vermonters are hurting. We're doing it for the folks that don't have a voice in the system. And we've got 3 more months for this race. Let's take this energy and use that energy to win in November and then go down to Montpelier in January. And even if we have a governor that is in the way, we can ride right over that hump. To me, that is a clear signal to the person you need to be working with at a time when the COVID dollars from the federal government are evaporating. The 2 top constitutional officers have to be in sync with each other, and if they are not, that means conflict for all of us. So I am not trying to cast aspersions or anything. The fact is, you don't have a good relationship with Phil Scott, and that is one of the facts I believe voters should be considering in this race.
Disagreeing with someone doesn't mean you don't have a good relationship. I disagree with you, but we have a good relationship.
True that.
Thank you both for sharing your views on that. And you can address it further in closing statements if you choose to, or it may come up in another question even. So, thank you. So this, we'll start with Joe in the next one. Are you planning to take any independent initiatives?
I have never seen a lieutenant governor pump this state and its people the way I intend to deliver that message. We have to have someone in this role who has the ability to be a salesperson. Many, many years ago, Durwood and Kay Ellis were running a store right down the street from here. And for those of you that don't know Durwood and Kay, that's the couple sitting in the very front row here. And when they did, I was working at a radio station right across the river called then WTWN, and I became a salesperson. And amongst the many places that I went to pitch radio advertising was to their store. The idea being that you take the desire of someone to generate something for the economy and you broadcast it to the world. That's the role of a salesperson. And that's the role I would want to bring to this office. It is important at this time, especially when we're losing those federal dollars, and everything that David has described as a problem, and I think we pretty much agree there are problems that we have to face, but the lieutenant governor can only actually address and do something about a certain number of those problems. And I want to do everything I can to take those problems that the lieutenant governor can address and deal with and be the best advocate for all of you that I possibly can be.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. David?
Well, thank you. I want to talk about what the Lieutenant Governor's office can do. It's often been discussed by my opponent about the limitations of the office and how you can't impact things or can't really change things. And then, of course, we debate all the issues that he sometimes indicates we can't do anything about. When in reality, there is a lot you can do. And some of these questions have touched on similar issues that we've been discussing. But I don't necessarily want to travel the globe to bring people to Vermont or encourage and sell Vermont to people around the world. We have people in Vermont who need their issues to be addressed. We have people in Vermont, my 16-year-old daughter, and some of your children or grandchildren, who are talking about not having children because of what's happening with the climate. We need to address what we can address here at home. We need to address the climate, and I will highly work on that with the Climate Solutions Caucus, with the governor, with anybody who's willing around the state to address a growing economy and a changing economy that can address the climate crisis at the same time. This is agriculture, it's beta technologies, it's what we do individually, it's what we do in our communities, it's where we build affordable housing and how densely we build it in our town and village centers to not only be more energy efficient, but also create a better life opportunity for those young Vermonters so that they can stay. If we have town and village centers with enough people that you can have that town store thrive, or a hardware store, then suddenly the distance people have to travel to get things isn't 20, 30, 40 miles like we often see around Vermont. So to me, it's about using the office to recreate and relocalize our economy and tackle the climate crisis so we can have hope and opportunity for the future for our children and grandchildren, and even for our day tomorrow and the next day, because we're in it now. It's an urgent issue of today as well as the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
David and I don't really disagree on climate change and the human impact on climate change. Where we definitely disagree is what Vermont can actually do about that in trying to bring about change. Vermont has a limited set of tools to work with. When we try to overachieve, we are really doing a disservice to those folks who are worried about the climate, like our kids, because Vermont cannot bear the burden of climate change correction by itself. We can't tell Ford, Toyota, GM, etc., that they have to build all electric vehicles. We don't have that within our power. We don't have the right to destroy mountaintop ridge lines in order to install intermittent power sources, because those intermittent power sources are sitting atop our best wildlife corridors and carbon sinks. There's part of this conversation that needs to be at the national level, and one of the reasons I'm in this race is I'm concerned about politicians who are trying to use the state of Vermont to do what should be done at the national level. And I know what our limitations are, and they get exacerbated when the federal government says, you're not going to get the billions we have sent you. You're going back to being able to sustain yourself. And I really believe we have to be intelligent in how we move forward to address the problem. Part of it is at the national level, part of it is at the state level. And when I hear words about consolidating our communities, to me that says to those of us who live in the rural parts of Vermont, watch your wallet, because the lowest hanging fruit in this discussion is gas-powered vehicles and the oil that you use to heat your homes. We can't put that burden on ourselves. It has to be a conversation at the national level.
Thank you. David, would you like to respond?
Well, I would just say I appreciate all the concerns my colleague here has brought up. Not any of them I think that I've really proposed with respect to placing the burden on any particular people. I think if your town is stronger, your whole town is stronger. If your village center is healthier, your whole town is stronger, because you actually would have to drive fewer miles to get to the hardware store instead of 3 towns away to the St. Johnsburys or the Middleburys of the world. And you know, it begs the question, historically, has Vermont punched above its weight? I'm pretty sure everyone in this room can think of at least one, if not 3 or 4 places where Vermont has punched above its weight and led the way. We led the way with marriage equality. We've led the way with no billboards. You know, we have led the way in numerous ways with respect to, I would say, decency and civility and democracy. We're leading the way with voting rights. You know, these are things we can do, and we can do many issues around the climate crisis within the limitations that we have to lead the way with innovation. We've led with innovation around affordable housing with the housing trust model. We can lead the way on transportation and heating fuel transition and weatherization, which we've led the way with some rhetoric, not quite as much with following through, but we've done some of those things. So I'm not going to limit us. If we limit ourselves before the opportunities that present us, then we're shorting ourselves of what we can do.
Thank you. I appreciate how the two of you are working hard to show the ways in which you're similar and the ways in which you're different, and you're doing that very politely. So.
I did that with my haircut. I was trying to get more similar.
I already went down this road with you, Dave. I'm still mad at you for not donating your locks to me.
Exactly. Exactly.
The next 2 questions, I'm going to ask them, even though they touch on issues that have already come up, but they'll give you a chance to maybe develop these points further. So this will go to David first. And again, you already have talked about this, but the Lieutenant Governor has a role in appointing committee members. How will you make decisions for these committees? So David first.
Well, certainly I've got the experience of doing that twice and look forward to doing it a 3rd time. The first thing is you want to make sure that there's some continuity from the past to the future because the workload on senators serving on 2 committees with the scale of the tasks they have to take on, if you had all new people on a committee and none of them had the institutional knowledge and history on some of these issues, I think that would be a real challenge for the process and for the people of Vermont. Secondly, you've got new people coming in. This year, at least 11, and maybe more, but likely 11, which is a pretty big turnover. So you want to make sure you find out the interests and the expertise of those individuals and apply them in the best way you can to the committees that they're both interested in and know a lot about. But you also got to look at the chemistry between people. I know Joe has talked about that in some other discussions we've had. I'm pleased that I've received the endorsement of the majority of returning members, And I believe I will have the endorsement of the majority of the new members as well, with respect to knowing who they are, having been lieutenant governor, the experience they have with me as lieutenant governor, or the experience they have with me from when they were either in the House moving to the Senate or in that community work that I had done before. So I will work with, of course, the Committee on Committees, the most arcanely named committee that ever existed in the universe. I suspect Senator Mazza will be on that again, as he was when I was lieutenant governor before. And it looks like Senator Philip Baruth will be on that committee as the president pro tem. And all three of us have deep respect for each other. Senator Mazza even sent me a text a while back saying, I miss you being up at the podium. You know, I look forward to being there again. And Senator Baruth has endorsed me many campaigns back when sometimes other people wouldn't. So we have a good relationship. The committee will work well together to make committees that work well and look forward to what's possible for the future.
Thank you. Joe?
So I'll start out by saying, Dave, it's easy to say that you have the majority of returning legislators who are endorsing you because they are members of the majority party. I happen to have all 7 of the Senate Republican caucus for what that's worth, but quite frankly, I don't think that's really something that bears a great deal on the answer to the question. This is a story of my first appearing in the legislature. I'm an attorney. I served on a school board. I served as a president of Lynn State College Foundation and the Rotary Club, and I had some interest in the way government process works. So when I was asked, what committees would you like to be on? I said, well, I'm an attorney. I'd like to be on the Judiciary Committee. I've been on a school board. I'd like to be on the Education Committee. And I really enjoy history and how the government process works, so government operations sounds like a great choice. The Democratic majority promptly put me on natural resources and energy and institutions. I'm not going to call that politics. I think as the new kid on the block, you're bound to get caught up in that process of they put who they think belong on committees, and then at the end, they got the newbies, and how do you deal with the newbies? I find this to be a fascinating discussion because one of the things David has missed over the past 2 years is actually being in the building at a time when the legislature was facing its worst period in history. 1836 was when the state Senate was created. And since that time, we have never had to deal with Zoom conferencing or COVID-19 or do you wear a mask, do you require vaccinations? People's attitudes were exposed in the rawest way. And knowing how that happened and what the end result was is an important part of the process in deciding going forward who should be on what committees and who should not be on certain committees. So I think at least as far as the last 2 years is concerned, I've got a little bit of an edge.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, this question you'll have first. And this has come up too, but this will give the two of you an opportunity to, if you want to expand on this, it's a very important thing. As Lieutenant Governor, how will you work with the governor, especially if he or she is of a different party? So, Joe?
So let me start with Phil Scott, and then I'll get to Brenda Siegel. Phil Scott and I today were down in Rutland doing a ceremony for the opening of a new housing project. Phil Scott and I have enjoyed working together. His campaign team and I have enjoyed working together, and his administrative team has enjoyed working with me as well. I don't think it would be anything other than a seamless transition should the governor be unable to continue in his functions. Let me skip ahead now to Brenda Siegel. I like Brenda Siegel. Brenda Siegel, I thought, was doing a job by sleeping out on the State House steps this past winter to try to bring attention to a very real problem. I respected her for that. And one morning, as I was coming into the building, I'm walking by the front steps, and I said, Brenda, please come in, I will buy you breakfast. That's a simple act by somebody who is from a totally different party. She later sort of told me she regretted going in to have breakfast because her body had actually become acclimated to the environment she was in, and when she went in and got warmed up and went back out again, she started shivering like crazy. But the idea of being able to extend that to somebody is very important to me. And I have 1 minute left to tell you another story. My very first day in the Senate, a member from Chittenden County, a Democrat named Philip Baruth, sat directly in front of me, and when all the veterans got up to go away for whatever they knew how to do, Philip and I were sitting there, what shall we do with each other? And he said, hey Benning, want to go out to lunch? We enjoyed lunch every week thereafter, right up until COVID came and hit. And I value that, and no matter who is in the governor's role, I will try to be as friendly and workable as possible.
Okay, thank you. David?
Well, a few things. One, I would say I've worked now with 4 different governors, I believe, and I've worked well with each and every one of them with respect to any issue that I brought up. We could communicate. I have Governor Scott's phone number. I'm sure you do too. And, you know, it's really the role in the Lieutenant Governor's office is frequently working on behalf of constituents and working with the different agencies in state government to help them through the process of whatever their issue is. And my office was well regarded for that, and I had numerous people say they'd never gotten a call back from any of their legislators, and they were pleased to get the call back from me to help resolve their issues. And I think working with the governor is really a broader conversation about working with an administration on behalf of Vermonters. And that's how I would view the role, and I'll work with whoever it is. And happy to work with the governor if he wins. Happy to work with Brenda if she wins. I'd probably agree on more issues with Brenda. I think one of the things you have in front of you is 2 people who get along with folks, including each other. I don't think it's a real question of whether we could work with people. I think we both have a long track record of working with folks who we disagree with and who we agree with. Part of it is, where do we stand on the issues? And the vast majority of Vermonters did not appreciate a veto of the minimum wage, did not appreciate veto of a climate bill, did not appreciate veto of harm reduction sites, or even the idea of looking into how they would work and possibly reduce the record number, 215 opioid deaths in Vermont last year. So being Lieutenant Governor is certainly about working with people, but it's also about voicing those differences and bringing up the issues that matter to Vermonters. It's not a contract with the governor. It's a contract with the people of the state of Vermont. Vermont's constitution was set up that you would elect each the governor and lieutenant governor as individuals. Many other states have it as a dual election. So the question is, not are either of us capable of the job or either of us nice people. It's who do you agree with, and will they be able to be a good voice for the people of Vermont, your neighbors? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Joe?
I'd just like to thank you for calling me a nice person. I think that's what you said. I should have pointed
I'd say
out.
it again, he's a nice person.
I should have pointed out that both Governor Douglas and Governor Scott have endorsed me in this campaign.
Okay, thank you.
Take that for what you wish.
So audience members, we have a few questions. We have a couple of questions that I'm going to start down now that came by email ahead of time. And then also we have a few questions from the audience this evening. So when we were here in June for the primary debate for Secretary of State, we had a lot of great audience questions. So we don't have as many tonight. So, but if you still want to ask a question, please do that. We have a few to go here. But this next one came by email, and also it is someone here tonight asked the same question. So I'll ask this one. And this will go to David first. Will you support a comprehensive revision of the 1987 State of Vermont policy on solid waste disposal and related treatment of landfill leachate?
Well, I have to say, I don't know that I know the exact specifics of that bill.
You're answering it first.
You might know better than I. A chicken in every pot. No, sorry. Certainly the legislature does revisit and adjust such laws, and I know that we now have just the one landfill, and it's in Coventry, so I suspect that's where part of this question comes from, and I certainly met with folks as Lieutenant Governor, both in Coventry and around the state, around leachate and runoff into our waterways and groundwater. And I think there's some real considerations there that need to be visited because it's a real concern, especially to people up this way, around the pollution and the impacts. My father passed away from cancer that was likely caused by radiation from surgeries he was doing and not wearing a lead vest, because we didn't know what the impacts would be, sometimes from repeated exposure to low levels of things that are presumed safe or might be safe supposedly at low levels. But we keep learning over and over that that's often, unfortunately, a bad assumption. And as someone who pushed hard on GMO regulations and sort of the concept of some of the chemicals being used in GMO agriculture being safe at low levels, I think it's something that really resonates with people now around the idea of the precautionary principle, where in Europe, before things are allowed to be used on all of us as guinea pigs by our chemical companies, by our landfill companies because of what they take in this case, or whatnot, they've got to be proven safe instead of us discovering after the fact that they're not only not safe, but now they've permeated everything. This is true whether it's PFAS, which is in just about everything, and we know obviously what happened in Bennington, but it's frankly in all of our products and in everything we have. And we worked on that with our firefighters, which, by the way, I have the professional firefighters endorsement because of some of the work we did to remove those fire retardants from your furniture. So I would think back to solid waste, since I have about 7 seconds left. Sure, why wouldn't we look at revising those with respect to some of the rules around what can come out as leachates and what do we do with our solid waste?
Thank you. Joe?
So let me
I
start
hope
by
I made
saying,
it easier for you.
I think so. Let me start by saying we used to have a whole bunch of landfills around the state, and one of the problems we in Linden learned was we had a certain landfill called the Parker landfill site that ended up on the EPA's Superfund list. And I, at the time, was representing the town of Linden in that legal action that was quite a bit of cost to the town. I don't ever want to see us get back to the position where we are dealing as individual towns with the federal government to fight a Superfund cleanup site. It is not healthy for any of us. We have now only one landfill in the state of Vermont. We all in the kingdom know it's in Coventry. I have two observations of that landfill. One is the methane gas that's being burned off. I have never heard a complaint about that part of it. I have heard the complaint about leachates leaking into the water streams, and now the folks in Quebec are rightfully raising concerns about what they may have to face. Should we be revamping? I think we have to constantly revamp, not just as a state, but also as a nation. David made mention a few moments ago about the state of Vermont punching above its weight level. This is the classic example of if we try to do something the wrong way, we're not punching above our weight, we're punching ourselves in the head. This is a national conversation. If you're going to try to decrease the waste stream, Vermont cannot do that by itself. New Hampshire sees a golden business opportunity every time we try to do something like that, and we do it to our own economic expense. We have a national government for a very good reason, and the national government is empowered to tell Debbie's snack cakes, you name that thing that is appearing on your shelf, that they have to change the packaging. But if Vermont tries to do that on its own, we are going to not accomplish anything other than drive ourselves to the poorhouse because we can't compete with the states around us.
Thank you. So the next question gets the award for the longest one of the evening. So it has 3 acronyms in it, and I'll explain the acronyms first. So one is ANR, which is, of course, the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. Another one is VAAFM. I bet a few people know what that is. Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Markets. And the third one is PFA or PFAS. And PFAs are, it stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. I don't know why people call it PFA, but wouldn't they like to say the longer version? Anyway, I almost got through it.
You did well.
So the per and polyfluoroalkyl substance. Anyway, and so, and this is from someone at Earth Community in Burlington. Sarah Knight, she says she's an Earth Community advocate and researcher. In the spring of 2021, the Conservation Law Foundation wrote to ANR Secretary Julie Moore and VAA-FM Secretary Anson Tebbets, urging them to disclose any PFA ingredients in pesticides used in Vermont, but no response was provided. PFAs are man-made bioaccumulative toxins which never break down and cause adverse health effects at single parts per trillion. EPA is working to rid pesticide products of PFA ingredients. Would you support laws or suits to require that the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Markets identify all PFA-type ingredients in any pesticides used in Vermont?
And you thought I got the hard one first.
Joe gets to go first on that one.
I'm going to boil this down to an easier way of describing this. Forever Chemicals. We fairly recently have taken Forever Chemicals under consideration. We've just never known about the effects. We've never thought about the effects and never really had any system in place to address those effects. I don't know why this woman did not get a response from either Julie Moore or Anson Tebbets. My guess is that neither has the laboratory equipment to define what is actually in every product that we look at. I think most often of fire retardant being a source of Forever Chemicals. Fire retardants are not made in the state of Vermont, which is why I come back to saying this is not a Vermont problem, it is a national problem. I'm not trying to say it's not a problem. I'm only saying that our state, with its limited income, its limited abilities, cannot wrestle with questions of this magnitude to the satisfaction of where I think this woman would prefer we go. So you have to understand that there are arguments to be made, but they have to be argued in the proper jurisdiction. To me, Forever Chemicals are an issue for Congress, not for the office David and I are currently running for.
Thank you. David?
Well, a couple things. I think Joe did a good job of summarizing the topic of Forever Chemicals. I would say that Vermont in the past has often teamed up with other states, be it California, which is basically the 6th largest economy in the world, so they've got some clout over these companies, and other states to sometimes tackle these kinds of issues. So I think Vermont can certainly join with other states in either compacts or political alliances to potentially take on some of these issues. With respect to the labs being able to test for PFAS, actually the makeup of the different chemicals is not something that's unknown. They could find out by just simply calling the chemical companies. And frankly, there's probably 15 to 25 major sprays, it may even be less than that, that are used in agriculture on our farms, on our conventional dairy farms in particular, that one with a little bit of research could probably find that information out. One of the things I did as Lieutenant Governor last time was I held a movie series around the state. And in casual terms, I'd call it a provocative movie series. And it was showing documentaries that addressed major issues that we face. And one of those movies was The Devil We Know, and it was specifically about PFAS. And I showed it not only at the Capitol, but I also took it down to Bennington County. And in both places, we had between 50 and maybe 150 people. In the last question near the end, my compatriot here said, you know, there's the health and there's the economy. And or said something relative to the economy, and we can't do things that are going to hurt the economy because of New Hampshire. Well, I think when we're talking about people's health, we have to find a balancing act that is not so one-sided towards the economy. We have to be looking towards an economy that includes products that doesn't lead to earlier rates of cancer and death in younger people. or impact birth and children for the rest of their lives. So I would take this issue very seriously, and it goes back to that. We didn't know. Actually, in Europe, they know quite a bit more because they do the precautionary principle. The research has been done. We can use other people's experiences to make better decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make clear, Tom, that I am not disagreeing fundamentally with the understanding that we need to take seriously this problem. I am arguing that the state does not have the resources that the national government does have and should bring into play to discuss this, because Vermont cannot by itself punch above its weight in this class. It requires a much better, stronger institution to deal with this, because it's a national problem, not just a Vermont problem.
And I just said I don't think we do nothing because of that answer.
Okay, thank you both. One of the audience questions, and this is complicated, and I'm not sure if I have the cards in the right order, but it goes on to a few cards, and but I can highlight a couple key parts of this for a question. So you can go a couple directions with this. So as you look at healthcare committees, are there issues you want to lift up so you'd seek a chair who would promote them? So that's healthcare, and then connected to that, one of the other parts of this question is if you would support a resolution to support federal Medicare for all in the healthcare system. Does that make sense?
Sure. I just wasn't sure who you wanted to answer first.
Yes. So you just want David
Okay.
first, right?
I didn't hear you indicate that. If you did, I just missed it.
I didn't hear it either.
Okay. Well, a few things. I have a lot of respect for Senator Ginny Lyons, who's been chair of the Health and Welfare Committee in the Senate, and I don't think there's really anybody who would suggest that that ought to change. And as I said earlier, I think there's continuity and stability that's very important. I know that with her knowledge of science and her deep work on healthcare issues, she's well aware of the system, and I think would encourage us moving in that direction. We actually already have on the books a law indicating that we should have health care for all. We came within inches, metaphorically, of that going into effect before Governor Shumlin pulled the plug on it. And so it's really a matter of rebuilding the public support for that and getting it implemented. It's quite clear. There are businesses far smaller than the 600,000 people that live in Vermont that self-insure. And they save a lot of money doing that, which essentially Medicare for all or Medicaid for all, both of which would be a self-insurance pool where we would actually save Vermonters millions and millions of dollars. Health insurance and health costs are something like 20% of our total economy in Vermont. And that's coming out of Vermonters' pockets, not as taxes, although in some sense it is, but as premiums and as bargaining pieces at the bargaining table in unions and otherwise. The reality is the total cost of a universal health care system would be lower and would save Vermonters money and build more access, particularly for primary care and preventative care medicine. Now, you're soon going to hear about taxes, because yes, we pay. We pay out of one pocket or the other. But with taxes and with a universal system, the average Vermonter would pay less, not more. And as we talk about Vermont being unaffordable, this is a major piece of Vermont's affordability crisis that fits within the housing and transportation area is also healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
So I hope to see the headline in the Caledonian tomorrow saying there are at least two big differences between us, David. We addressed this issue extensively, and I'm going to talk about the second part of the question. Should we have universal health care in Vermont for all? We went upside and downside, every side you can imagine, trying to investigate whether the state of Vermont could sustain that. And at the end of the day, it was the Republicans who started saying, we cannot sustain this system for various reasons, including that doctors would be in a position of having to limit their incomes in order to stay under the cap that we were trying to preserve at the end of the day. The problem became obvious to Peter Shumlin at the very last moment. But between the introduction and Peter Shumlin pulling the plug, we lost over $200 million of your taxpayer dollars trying to investigate whether this would work in Vermont by itself. And we came to the conclusion it was not going to work. When I hear David bringing up this issue now, I believe it exacerbates the affordability crisis, because all of us are going to be in a position of trying to sustain something that is the largest government project this state has ever seen. I will confess that when Al Gobey took over the Green Mountain Care Board, we sat down with him and talked about what we had for a system. And he admitted if we were going to do this from scratch, we'd never have the system we do now. But I'll come back to say, if you're going to have this discussion, the 640,000 people in this state should not be bearing the burden of this conversation. This is a national discussion to be had. I will agree with David on Senator Ginny Lyons. You certainly don't want to appoint somebody to a chair of a committee that opposes everything the committee does. And Senator Lyons has earned my respect. She has been on my Senate Institutions Committee, and I was on her Natural Resources and Energy Committee. I think she's doing a great job on health and welfare.
So I know David wants to respond. What if we have 4 more questions from the audience, and if we do them quickly, like a minute or less on each of them, we could get through these, and then in your closing statements, you can go back to any issues that you feel are unresolved. All right. So some of these maybe we could do really fast. Where do you stand on nuclear power to reduce utility cost?
So 1 minute for each.
1 minute on these. Yes. Oh, Joe.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it is worth looking into. I'm not committed to it, but nuclear power has come a long way. There are many countries in the world that are looking in that direction to try to resolve their own crises. I am not committed to it. I think there's a lot of evidence out there that needs to be investigated, and before I committed to making an answer to the question, I'd want to know what that evidence is.
Thank you. David.
I'm opposed.
Thank you.
Saving you some time. Pretty straightforward.
Quick and brief. Okay. Do this one in 1 minute. What do you plan to do to reduce the tax burden for Vermonters? David first.
Well, there's a few things there. Whenever that question is asked, I think it's important to put it into context of what programs are you ready to cut? What services do you want to, whose ox do you want to gore? What investment do you not want to make in our future? What investment do you want to not make in the people of Vermont, whether it's education or technical training and education, or helping people become plumbers, or putting a roof over someone's head, or helping people save money by weatherizing their home? So taxes are hard. And taxes are hard because we have seen the top level in our country have their taxes cut over and over and over again since trickle-down Reaganomics and neoliberalism. And that means the burden has fallen on working people. And it's time to look at whether or not we're going to continue putting the burden on everyday working people when they go to the store to buy the everyday needs that they need, and continue to charge them the kind of sales tax we do, because we've got, while we do have a progressive income tax, we still don't have as progressive an income tax as we could. So I would look at shifting it in that way. I would also look towards moving our education funding system more towards income-based. Thank you.
Joe?
Dana, 3 things in your headline tomorrow of differences between us. I would hold the line on taxes. I don't think we need to be developing new programs that require new taxes. I agree with Phil Scott, who has managed to keep taxes down throughout his career. I would do 2 things to bring them down. One is I would remove income tax from military pensions. We've made a dent in that door this year, but it's high past time that those who have given service to their country should not be taxed at the end of their lives with what little pension they've got. And lastly, those of us who are going to be entering into Social Security stages, Sorry for some of you, but thankfully I'm not quite there yet. But if you are on Social Security, I don't think it's fair for you to be taxed, and I would hold the line.
Thank you. The next question, the person in the audience wrote separate questions for each of you. They're similar, and they also deal with issues we've already talked about before. This will give you a chance in case you want to add anything to it. The essential question is, how would you use what would you use your platform as Lieutenant Governor to promote or to educate people about?
Is this 1 minute?
1 minute, yes. And Joe's first.
Vermonters, their work ethic, their work product, the Vermont brand, these green hills and silver waters, that's what I want to be out there, literally being Vermont's chief promoter. And I would use this platform to do that in every way, shape, or form I can. My campaign has been to every single town in this state. I joined the 251 Club. I've completed it. I know every town. I know the issues they are facing, and I believe we are all in desperate need of having someone promote us. And that's what I would want to do as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. David?
Well, as I said earlier, I think climate and economic struggles would be the top issues that I'd work on. But I'm going to use the time to address a couple other things. One is the healthcare system that we're stuck with now is going up at 10, 15, 20% a year. I would argue that's pretty unsustainable. So if folks want to continue with that, as my colleague seems to, relative to a transformation into a system that would work better, I just want to put that out there. Secondly, I want to dispel another myth. Governor Scott was fortunate to take office as the economy was growing and booming under the Obama administration, and then we had the good fortune of living in a state that got basically 2 to 5 times the amount of money per capita of every other state in the country because of Senator Leahy and the small state minimum. And so we got to give out money to businesses and have shot clinics and everything else and not have to raise any money to do it. So I give Scott a lot of credit for handling of the COVID crisis, but I do think there's a myth out there with respect to doing it all without raising taxes. He spent other people's money, which is great. Many people could have done that. But when we have to talk about cutting taxes, as I said earlier, it's good to have those goals. I didn't hear what my fellow candidate was going to cut in order to do that.
Thank you. So the last question, again, we'll do this as a quick one, and then for closing statements, you will each have 2 minutes. So the last question has 2 parts. Do you support ranked choice voting? And what would you do to educate voters about how it works? And David first.
Sure. I've supported ranked choice voting for a couple decades now. I think people are really tired of the two-party system nationally. I think it's very divisive, very polarizing. And with ranked choice voting, all it really is the allowance for more people to run, and then you have a runoff election the same day instead of 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks later with lower turnout, more campaigning, more spending in ways that, frankly, our money could be better spent. Ranked choice voting will broaden the conversation with respect to the issues that could be addressed. It'll broaden the opportunity for people with views that aren't currently viable. I think, there are folks within my compatriots' party who are quite different, although I think you're courting their votes, who have organized January 6th, who would be in a general election, but wouldn't be a, quote, spoiler for someone like Joe or someone from the left who wouldn't then be a spoiler. It would allow for real conversation, and I would work to educate people anywhere in the state. Happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. And Joe?
Dana, we're up to 4 differences between us.
There are more.
I have absolutely no desire to go in that direction as a result of what Burlington did and Burlington suffered from. I don't believe that the two-party system by itself is flawed. I believe that the people who have been involved in running for those respective parties have brought upon us all a great tribal warfare. And we need to figure out a way to reach across the aisles to each other and say, that's just not acceptable. And when I hear David make reference to my party and the folks who were involved in January 6th, David knows very well what my opinion of that has been, and every paper in this state has had an op-ed piece for me indicating I found that to be appalling behavior. That's just not the America that we deserve and need to have back. So to have conversations like this tonight all of us have a different opinion about virtually everything in the world we could talk about. But at the end of the day, we should still be able to do what Philip Baruth did to me and say, let's go out and have dinner and talk. It's a simple thing, but we need to get there.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to closing statements, and the opening statements, Joe went first, so closing statements, David will go first. This is 2 minutes.
Well, I appreciate the evening. It's been a pleasure, Joe, as it always is, and hope it's been informative for everyone in the audience. As I've spoken of, I have a proven track record of being an effective advocate, as well as being an effective lieutenant governor for Vermont and Vermonters. I've fought as an advocate with Vermonters to help raise minimum wage, GMO labeling, marriage equality, cannabis reform. I've worked on healthcare improvements, local agriculture bills that have fueled the local economy and our resilience to the climate crisis. I'm running to make things better for my daughter, for your children, and your grandchildren. This election, folks do have a choice between business as usual and laissez-faire governance and bold leadership. From what I've seen, business as usual has left Vermont less affordable for everyday Vermonters. Costs are driving out, housing costs are going up, and it's hard to put food on the table. Young people are leaving the state, and the COVID migration to Vermont is exacerbating that, while it's also something that we appreciate because we want people to move here. When serving as lieutenant governor, my door was always open. Joe, I think you drank a few cups of coffee in there over the years, as well as to Vermonters all across the state. Those coffee hours were a part of bringing people into the State House to be able to amplify their voices, to help them navigate the halls of the beautiful and important building that we have that symbolizes what democracy can be when people get involved in it. We have to increase people's access to the halls of power. My passion for service to Vermonters does not stop at the office door. Treating people with dignity is something that I've done through my 20 years of office, working with people across all aisles, not the aisle, to get them involved in the process. I look forward to being lieutenant governor and hitting the ground running on day one. And if anybody has any questions about me, you can reach out through zuckermanforvermont.com. That's Zuckerman, FORVT.com. And thank you for the evening.
Thank you, David. Joe?
David, I'll do the same thing we've done in the past.
I know the routine.
Just so you know, as a trial lawyer, I have always endeavored to shake the hand of the lawyer on the other side before the jury comes back with a verdict. It has been an honor and a pleasure to serve the state of Vermont for the past 12 years. I like to think I have a track record that fits as well. Not only have I done things like help clean up the Passumpsic River, where we took out 32 tons of metal car parts, over 500 tires, and about 3,000 pounds of trash over a 5-mile stretch of that river as the president of the Lindenville Rotary Club. We have worked on the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. If you are a woman with dense breast tissue, your doctor, in a quest for searching for cancer, is required now to go beyond a simple mammogram as a result of a bill that I brought when Leslie Mulcahy from the Rabbit Hill Inn came to me and told me about her problem and asked me to help fix it. I like to think that in my work in the legislature, I have spent a lot of time working across the aisle, but I want to leave you with one thought in particular. This race can be boiled down into one simple question. The two top constitutional offices in this state are the governor and the lieutenant governor. At a time when we are losing all of that federal money that has benefited us, do you want to have synchronization and cohesion in those two offices or conflict? The record with Phil Scott and David has been conflict. I offer a smooth transition, and I like to think that makes me a better candidate in this particular election. Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. It has been a very nice discussion. And thanks, Deb, for running the cards.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Sue Racanelli from League of Women Voters, who's going to come up and close things. Thank you both for making my job easy.
Thank you for doing a good job.
Yes.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I want to thank the candidates, Senator Joe Benning and David Zuckerman, Kingdom Access Television for streaming this forum, St. Johnsbury Athenaeum for hosting us, our moderator Tom McCone, our volunteers, and our co-sponsors, the Vermont Commission on Women and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and you, our viewers, for being here this evening. A reminder that all active registered voters will receive their ballots in the mail by late September for the November 8th general election. You can vote early, you can vote in person at your town or city clerk's office, or you may vote in person at the polls on Tuesday, November the 8th. Make an effort, make a decision, make a difference. Every vote counts, and we know that to be the case in Vermont. Good night, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. It's wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Nice job as moderator.